Good afternoon. This is Councilman David O. Thank you for joining me once again for In the Know with David O. here on WWDB 860 AM every Tuesday 2 to 3. Let me start by thanking the show's primary sponsor, that is Weinerman Pain and Wellness. They are a fantastic organization. I know because I used to do workers' comp defense and some claimants work, and so I'm very familiar with work-related injuries. They do more than work-related injuries. If you need to be physically rehabbed to get back to life as usual or as best as you can, that's an important thing to do, and you want to make sure that you have the best care available. Weinerman Pain and Wellness does a wonderful job. Last week, if you recall, we were talking to Joe Brooks, President and CEO of Liberty USO. I'm sure you've heard of the USO. They support our military families. And it was the 76th annual USO Gala. Let me tell you, I was there, 700 attendees, fantastic event. Congratulations to Joe Brooks, the chairman of the board, Navy SEAL, Ryan Peters, fantastic job he did. And they continue with their mission. We also talked to Clayton Prince. You may remember him if you watch The Cosby Show. Well, he's an actor, writer, and producer, and he talked to us about his four-part series, Cream, which you can see on Amazon. And then we talked to James Douglas. He's a commander at the ACES Museum. It is a museum in Philadelphia on Germantown Avenue, which honors the African American veterans who've served in World War II, Vietnam, and other wars. And it's always important to remember those who've served. Today's show, we're going to talk to two gentlemen. The first is here in the studio with me right now. His name is Juman Kim. And he is a former instructor, or if you will, assistant professor at the Korea Air Force Academy. He's in Philadelphia because he is getting his PhD. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania in political science, in particular, political theory. But he attended and graduated from Yonsei University, oftentimes considered one of the top two universities in Korea. He received his bachelor's and his master's in political science. And so he is a wonderful person for us to talk to, because we're going to talk about this subject. You may have heard quite a bit about North Korea. What do you think when I say North Korea? North Korea, right? A lot of different ideas. But not a lot of understanding about what North Korea is, what its capabilities are, and most importantly, what are its perspectives? Why do they hate us? And why do they say they're going to attack us with nuclear weapons and all sorts of things? So, that's a question that we are going to explore today with Juman Kim. So let me welcome him. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
All right. Now I met Juman Kim because I've attended a couple events where he was speaking, and I found his presentations to be very well researched, very enlightening, and I learned a whole lot of things that I really didn't know about. And one of the topics he talked about on one occasion was about North Korea. And so let me start with this. You were born and raised in Korea, is that right?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Seoul, South Korea.
Seoul is the capital of South
Yes,
Korea.
correct.
And some people ask me, they say, oh, you're Korean American. Were you born in Korea? Were you born in North Korea or South Korea? So you may be surprised to find that not everybody knows the difference between North Korea and South Korea. So just for our listeners, listen, there's a country called Korea, just like there's a country called Germany. And it was not always two different countries, but after World War II, it was divided by the Russians and the Americans, and basically the northern portion became a communist country, the southern portion a democratic country, and then there was the outbreak of the Korean War, which ended pretty much where it started, along the 38th parallel, and the war has never ended. It continues today. There's an armistice, basically a truth a peace treaty. Just basically what's going on is they're at a stalemate along the 38th parallel, and so North Korea is in the news when you hear about threats to the United States and all kinds of strange things. And then South Korea is the very strong ally of the United States of America, where the U.S. sent troops during the Korean War, and Korea in return sent its troops, about 350,000 troops, to fight alongside the U.S. And American military during the Vietnam War. First of all, there is a continuing threat of war between South and North Korea, and some people tell me, well, that must be very difficult. Do people worry about it? And I say, well, you may be more familiar with the situation in the Middle East, perhaps Israel, things like that, and so I imagine it's pretty much the similar type of thing. Life goes on. But let me ask Juman Kim, you're growing up in Korea. Was there a concern relative to today's situation about North Korea?
I think when I grew up in Seoul, there was more concerns, if I recall correctly, with the possible outbreak of war.
Yeah, maybe because it was closer to
Exactly.
the Korean War.
Yeah, but now South Koreans would say most of them at least, they don't think there would be any real war in the foreseeable future. But older generations who actually had first-hand experience of Korean
Right.
War, they were definitely more concerned with the possibility. So that's a difference.
Right.
But now I can see more discussions, debates, and conversations among Americans
Right.
about this outrageous behavior of Kim Jong-un, or the possibility of war between, or at least exchange of nuclear devices between U.S. and North Korea, or South Korea and the North Korea. So. That's, I think, the differences I observe.
Right. It's interesting to me because nobody really expects war, and then suddenly there it is. And so the older generation, having experienced a lot of war, World War II, the Korean War, all those type of things, they tend to be more concerned. And then their children who were growing up during the time of really the 1960s, like that, there's really more concern, maybe early 70s, about the communist invasion, infiltration, those type of things. But today's young generation, in a very modern, economically prosperous country called South Korea, you're saying they don't worry about that too much. They haven't not experienced it. The older generation may be saying, you got to be careful, and them saying, look, we haven't seen any problems so far. And so that's interesting. But then here in the United States, the U.S. sent Americans to Korea with a great loss of life, and so the U.S. is a strong ally of South Korea and has a military presence and a history of being engaged in affairs in East Asia, World War II, the Korean War, and then Southeast Asia with the Vietnam War. And so for Americans, the idea of North Korea attacking South Korea somehow is relevant to them. I'm talking about the listeners. If the North Korea invades South Korea, they feel that we are directly affected. What do you think about their perception?
I think part of it is understandable and legitimate because although this crisis, North Korean crisis, is an old problem by now, but there are some new aspects of it. Part of it is, I think, this year alone we have witnessed more than 25 or almost 25 missile tests in North Korea, and also they now are capable of launching a intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's what the U.S. intelligence believe. If they cannot do that at the moment, they will be capable of doing that very soon. So in that sense, North Korean threat is not just about South Koreans' problem. Now it's about U.S. National security problem as well. And one thing I'd like to put some emphasis on is that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, many people say he's irrational, he's maybe close to crazy, but I don't think he's irrational in terms of building up his nuclear weapons program, because he has been doing this very straightforward, in a straightforward way and explicitly, and for two reasons. One is for his own survival, the survival of his regime and himself, perhaps. And the second reason is to break or to weaken the alliance between U.S. and South Korea and Japan, perhaps. So in that sense, he has been doing this for reasons, and we have to take serious why and how he has been doing this. And another kind of misconception is that North Korea is basically far weaker than the U.S. So even if they are capable of launching some missiles, they would know that if they did, they would be annihilated immediately. So he would not do that, right? So that's another kind of misconception, I believe.
Because he would do that, is that what you're saying?
Yes, because I think some of the well-known scholars in this field of nuclear deterrence, have argued that the problem is, so I don't believe that both the U.S. and North Korea would initiate a war anytime soon by design, but the problem is they would have a similar, they would be trapped into this similar war-like situation by miscalculation or by accident. And one possible worst scenario would be if Kim Jong-un somehow firmly believes that the U.S.-led invasion is imminent. Then what would he do with his new nuclear devices? And yes, he's weaker, far weaker than the U.S. Power, but the scholars have argued that that's the part of the problem. There is a theory called the asymmetric escalation, which can be employed by states that have weaker conventional military. So in this case, North Korea would want to launch one set of nuclear devices first, so as to stave off the conventional invasion, while holding in reserve the more powerful, the longer range nuclear devices, indicating that they have a real power to threaten the major cities of the United States, so that U.S. would back off. So that's the worst case scenario.
In which case the U.S. may not back off, but rather attack them with our own nuclear weapon.
No, I mean, what they would think is that
North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea. U.S. would not sacrifice, for example, San Francisco for Seoul or Texas for Japan, right? If they have a longer range intercontinental ballistic missiles with miniaturized nuclear warheads, then U.S. have to think about the multiple options seriously, whether they should go to war to protect their allies in East Asia, or just to let them, let North Koreans to save their regime and do whatever they want.
Of course, but they're calculating the U.S. response.
Exactly.
And the U.S. has already calculated their response
Exactly.
before they send the conventional military.
Yeah, that's why I'm talking about miscalculation.
Yeah, so in a complex situation like
Yeah.
that, where everyone has experts calculating what the other person's going to do and not do, so there might be a miscalculation.
Yeah, so in that sense, I think it's not wise to keep escalating the war of wars,
Yes.
which we have been witnessing.
We have currently with President
Exactly.
Trump and with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
But no matter what people say, it shouldn't escalate. But in fact, it appears to continue to escalate. We don't expect it not to escalate.
I mean, so that's a problem of politics, as you know,
Right. Right.
So, yeah. But I want to emphasize this point that even if we don't expect the war by, design or by intention, something could happen by accident or miscalculation, especially when North Korea and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un is deeply concerned with the survival of his own regime and his power.
What is the problem with his regime and his power? Is it under threat internally in North Korea?
Both internally and externally.
By the U.S. or
Yes.
some other foreign power?
Yes, so I don't think he has any imminent danger or threat internally, but the problem is since he assumed the power only 6 years ago,
Yes.
he's relatively young, in his mid-30s, and he didn't have much experience of politics when he took the power,
Right.
when his father Kim Jong-il died. So he had to show his competence of governing his country. And one of the long-time state propaganda in North Korea, which has been based on partial truth, was that they are basically surrounded by these evil powers, South Korea, Japan, and U.S. They don't normally treat South Korea as a legitimate government of the part of Korean Peninsula, like South Koreans did.
Right.
So in that sense, the U.S. Is a real threat, existential threat to North Korea. And if U.S. Keeps threatening North Koreans by displaying its power, destructive power perhaps from their perspective,
Right.
then it works really well from the perspective of Kim Jong-un to control over his population, because that's how he maintains his power. Look, we have enemies out there, so that so we have to make very cohesive and a powerful nation, and under my leadership and control. So if you watch North Korean news and newspaper or televisions.
Does anybody out there watch the North Korean newspaper or news? Oh, I don't think so. But,
Yeah, right.
But you do. That's why you're a
Sometimes
scholar.
I do. Yeah, sometimes I do.
Yeah.
And the young North Korean students, they
okay.
just took the street right after President Trump's the speech or
Yes.
comment on Kim Jong-un as a rocket man, or he talked about they would see the fire and fury, something like that. Those Koreans, they whether they voluntarily took the street or they were forced to demonstrate, they tried to respond to this kind of threat from U.S. In a real sense. So it actually, I think, in a way, helped Kim Jong-un to continue to his state propaganda and to keep his power intact.
So we read many times about North Korea, starvation, things like that, people fleeing. I recently heard something a little different. I heard somebody was in North Korea and he said, for the first time I saw fat North Koreans, because there is a portion of a middle class, although it's not supposed to exist and may be under threat, providing like a kind of a almost black market items. What is going on economically in North Korea?
Economically speaking, in my knowledge, North Korean economy is getting better. I mean, compared to several years prior. So, but one thing we have to make sure whenever we talk about North Korea or North Korean civil society is that there is a stark contrast between Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea,
Right.
and the rest of the country. So
Okay.
Pyongyang is, relatively speaking, a modern city where close to 2 million people live a normal life.
Right.
And but the rest of the North Korea, there's a whole different story is going
Right.
on.
What's the population of North Korea?
It's about 25 million.
So there's 2 million living in a relatively modern city and 23 million.
I mean, the population of Pyongyang might be, larger than that.
Yes.
But I'm talking about the relatively
Right. Well-to-do
well-off
there.
people.
Yes. Okay.
So the problem is that as a scholar and student of political science, I think there will be no political social change without a newly formed or new division among elite members. So popular uprising might work temporarily. Protests can be effective.
Right.
But the real issue when we talk about political change is whether we can give enough new incentives to elite members. And
The
Yeah.
educated, powerful
Yeah.
In North Korea to basically sustain a change of order in North Korea.
yes, so if the elite members just choose to flock to Kim Jong-un
Right.
and decide that, they can be well off in this maintaining the status quo, then it will be really hard to see a real change in North Korea, and that's what is happening right now, in my knowledge.
Right.
Many people in North Korea, they are under a serious, the problem, but very small number of village members they choose not to do anything threatening to the system.
They're satisfied. They're doing
Exactly.
okay, so they're not really threatening the Kim Jong-un regime.
Exactly. And the only time in my knowledge, only time there was a coup d'etat or some sort of internal resistance coming from the elite members was back in 1955 or so. So it's a very long time ago. I mean, to put it differently, Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, and Kim Jong-il, the son of Kim Il-sung and the founder of the current leader, they consolidated their powers so effectively so that they purged,
Any opposition and
exactly.
resistance.
Yeah.
And we recently read about some executions in North Korea, and of course the very odd situation where two women wiped some toxin on, I guess, his brother, half-brother.
Half-brother,
yes.
yeah, in Malaysia.
Yeah, so what's going on there? If everything, they consolidated their power, what is, why the executions and assassinations?
I think Kim Jong-un, as I said, is a relatively new leader, and he needed to check with other military leaders and political leaders. And since their state ideology is deeply based on kind of family myth
Right.
of the founding and the development of North Korea, starting with the founder of North Korea, Kim
Right.
Il-sung, who fought, which is true, against the Japanese imperial power back in 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s.
Right.
So the only if are some people who wanted to change the North Korea politically,
Right.
then those people would try to find a way to give some power to somebody in that royal family.
Right. Okay.
So the guy who was assassinated, Kim Jong-nam, was the first son of
Right.
Kim Jong-il.
Mm.
So he's a half-brother of the current leader.
Right.
So although he didn't express any interest in politics from very early on,
Right.
that's why he just traveled to Southeast Asia, China, and just lived his own private life.
Right.
But Kim Jong-un would have thought
Right.
that even if this person Kim Jong-nam didn't have any interest, some other political elite would flock to him.
Blocked it.
Yeah,
Yes.
to go against Kim Jong-un and the current power. So that's possibly answer, but we do not know exactly what happened, except the fact that he was
Assassinated. Okay, well, listen, everyone. Stay tuned. This is fascinating. We'll be right back after this commercial break to hear about North Korea. Do they really hate us? If so, why? And how deeply does that run? Stay tuned. Okay, so. All right, we are back. Listen, you heard me talk, about the Green Beret Foundation fundraiser that I was hosting, and thank you to everyone who supported the event. It turned out to be fantastic. We had about 300 attendees, and we hit our goal. We raised $30,000, and after expenses, we were able to deliver $20,000 to the Green Beret Foundation for U.S. Army Special Forces. And special thanks to Governor Ed Rendell, who attended our event, and the former Undersecretary of the Army, former Congressman Patrick Murphy, and many others, too many to name here, that were just so instrumental to the success of that event. And let me just say that Thursday morning at 9 o'clock outside of City Hall at the northeast side, in between Broad Street and Market Street and northeast side, I will be calling for a rally to end discrimination, and that is a rally at City Hall as we fight for fairness, particularly against the law that targets, oddly, Chinese takeout restaurants. Anyway, that's a long history of issues, but in particular an ordinance that requires that businesses close at 11 p.m., but the businesses, 96% of the businesses in 2015 were only Chinese takeout restaurants, and the fine is $2,000 per violation, and rather than L&I enforce the law, it's being enforced by the police. And that is not really the right entity to enforce this law. But if you want more information, contact my office, david.o, 2 letters OH, david.o at phila, phila.gov, G-O-V. All right, and we were talking about North Korea. And for many people, they just hear about North Korea. It's certainly prominently in the news, but they don't know much about North Korea. And so we're here with Juman Kim. He was a assistant professor at the Korea Air Force Academy. He received his BA and MA in political science from Yonsei University, one of the really top universities in Korea, and is now in Philadelphia as a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania. So again, thank you. And here is my question. Do North Koreans, or is it just the leadership that hates the United States? And if so, why? Why do they hate the United States?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it might sound odd that somewhere in East Asia the people really hate United States and Americans.
Yeah, they're so far away.
Yeah.
They're a little tiny country, and of all the countries in the world, why do they hate the United States?
Exactly. I think the anti-American sentiments are pervasive, pervading the North Korean society, and part of the reason is because the state runs this propaganda. But there is some truth. I just want to give the listener some numbers so that they can
Understand the North Korean perspective.
Exactly. So if we look at the amount of bombs the U.S. Air Force dropped to North Korea during the Korean War.
50 to 53, 1950 to 53. Okay.
Yeah, it's like more than 300,000 tons of explosives.
Mm.
Among them were more than 30,000 tons of napalm.
Mm.
So if we want to put this into perspective, it's more than the entire amount of explosives the U.S. used during the World War II on the entire Pacific region.
Mm.
It was about 500,000.
Right.
So basically, if you are North Korean, especially the older generation, the first-hand experience of Korean War was bomb dropping.
Right.
And 18 out of 22 major cities were destroyed.
Mm.
And about 20% of the entire population were killed off.
Right.
So that's just difficult fact, right?
Right,
and
right.
difficult truth. So if you had this experience and you had this particularly authoritarian government
Right.
who has used this truth,
Propaganda,
yeah.
the facts are true.
Yeah,
And they
but-
have used that against people who have experienced the
Mhm.
loss of loved ones under horrific circumstances.
So there are museums everywhere in North Korea.
To remind people of the
Exactly.
horrors of war.
And then school children were taught to hate, the United States and Americans.
And to fear Americans, I'm
Of
sure,
course,
right?
of course.
The worst thing that could happen is an American shows up and, like some kind of monster, right?
Yeah, exactly. So once I watched this video clip of one of the North Korean defectors.
Mm.
He visited the United States, but he described how anxious he was, right, at landing.
Very nervous. Right?
Exactly, because for the past 10 years or 15 years, all of entire his life he feared of the United States.
Right.
So that's something we who are living in the United States.
We're not familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because, historically it was North Korea that invaded the South, and then there was a response. There was a point in time where they very successfully invaded the South, and of course we have MacArthur's landing at Incheon, and so many times we were not aware of the amount of bombs that were dropped, and so for people who are just living in North Korea, they're not part of the government, they don't really know what's going on. It had been one unified country. They have relatives in the South, and people in the South have relatives in the North, but so what has happened is, not only is the North Korean leader, at this time Kim Jong-un, really trying to consolidate his power both internally, externally, by targeting and focusing on his enemy, the U.S., but he is able to gather the support of the people because of this long-standing propaganda, education to them, to fear of all the possible ills and problems, the U.S.
And I can say, just from my own experience, because growing up back in late 80s or early 90s, when I was a little kid, we were encouraged to hate North Koreans.
Right,
back
right,
then.
sure.
Yeah, so we had a writing contest, painting contest, speech contest, and theme was like anti-communist, semi-propaganda.
Right.
So now South Koreans do not do this kind of thing anymore,
Right.
but up until late 80s, early 90s, we still did that.
Right.
So I, part of my family, by the way, my paternal grandparents, both of them were born and raised in northern part of Korea before the division of two Koreas. So it was my grandfather's deliberate decision to come down south in 1945, right after the liberation of Korea from Japanese power, So I have some, remote relatives living in North Korea right
Yes.
now, but I still feared growing up
Mhm.
of Kim Il-sung, the then leader of North Korea, and also North Korean power.
Yes, and again for good reason, because when the North Koreans came down to South Korea, they were killing a lot of people, citizens, I mean just civilians, and there was a lot of war and devastation. And back and forth, was just a very, blood-shedding war. And right after World War II, which was yet another, major loss of life. In the time remaining, let me ask you this question. For our listeners, just the everyday folks out there listening, is there something that you think we as Americans should be aware of when we when we look at our government and our leaders as they deal with how to deal with this threat? Some people think it's not a threat at all. This North Korea is too weak. It doesn't have enough capabilities. This leader is a kind of a crazy, insane person, mostly just talking. Other people think, hey, he's a real threat. He's going to send terrorists through. They're probably equipping some of the terrorists with terrorists that are anti-American. So what is it that we should know about North Korea that will help us as we vote for our leaders and communicate to our leaders? What should we be doing with them about North Korea? Should we, for example, let South Korea take the lead? Should we take the lead? What is the information that people should know about?
I mean, to be honest, the East Asian security system, I think, is there's something tectonic changes on the way, and policy-wise or political, agenda-wise, it's really hard to think how can we change this sort of semi-permanent crisis. But setting aside that policy issue, perhaps I think as a citizen or civil society, I would say that we should think more about North Korean people. Ultimately, I believe it's up to the people to change the society.
Right.
And I'm aware of a lot of civic organizations who have been doing miraculously amazing work, including some medical help to North Korean people. North Korea is a country where many people suffer from this multi-drugs resistant tuberculosis. And I know they, including some Korean Americans,
Right.
like you. There is the person I do not know in person, but this person named Justin Sun, KJ Justin Sun, who is a medical doctor, but he has been doing amazing work helping North Korean patients, especially targeting this MDR tuberculosis. And other kind of thing we can do is to to let people, then North Korean people know what is going on outside their confines of experience. So North Korean people, in my knowledge, now they watch American movies, South Korean TV shows, but that make them jealous and envious. But it is not necessarily connected to their idea that we gotta change our system, right? So there should be more work on this, intercultural, exchanges and some sort of civic assistance kind of thing.
Okay, hearts and minds, winning hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Especially, for those like me who believe that the U.S. is a wonderful society and bringing democracy and opportunity. We want to let people know that we're not haters. We're people who want to see everybody do well. So listen, everybody, stay tuned. We will be coming back with Rodney Little to talk about the Men's Kingdom Conference. Okay, and we are back. Listen, we were talking to Juman Kim. He is a former assistant professor at the Korea Air Force Academy. Now here in Philadelphia getting his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. We were talking about North Korea. If you missed the discussion, go to www.wwdbam.com and you'll be able to hear a podcast of today's show. And if you want to hear other shows, that's on there. And if you want to see a video, and I'll apologize because I'm thinking that not all the videos are up yet, but we'll get the videos up. You can go see who we're talking to at youtube.com. Just type in the Know with David O. Now I'd like to introduce you to Rodney Little. He is with Citizens Networking for Progress PAC. They're a good government PAC, and they get involved in doing things to ensure that we have good governance and government is acting as it should. But he is also the president and CEO of RL Little Consulting, a former commissioner on the Pennsylvania Governor's Advisory Commission on African American Affairs, former co-host of the Boardroom Meeting, which is a business formatted talk show that was on WWDB 860 AM. But he is also a retired Sergeant Major, U.S. Army, and a retired police officer. He was, in fact, the president of the Fraternal Order of Housing Police. Rodney, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Councilman.
All right, and you were talking to us about something that you're working on with Citizens Networking for Progress, and that is really a call to action to do something about crime, reduce crime. Tell us about what's going on with the Kingdom Men's Conference Crime Prevention Summit.
Yes, and thank you, Councilman O, for having us. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Lewis Felton, who is the senior pastor and servant leader of Mount Airy Church of God in Christ, and also Bishop Ernest C. Morris, the senior founder.
Yes.
This coming Friday, October the 27th, and Saturday, October 28th, in conjunction with Mount Airy Church of God in Christ, and also with Kojic Urban Initiative and Citizens Networking for Progress, decided to put on this conference, this great men's conference, the Kingdom Men's Conference Crime Prevention Summit. And we have a whole list of panelists. What we're doing is actually putting out the call to action. And what it is realistically, Councilman, I'm going to say with a black agenda,
Yes.
Because we want to make sure that this call to action will have all the churches in our city open their doors, to have an after-school tutoring program, mentoring program for our children, and also to have attorneys sign up for 2 hours a month. We ask them to commit for at least a year to give out free legal advice. Because on our panel, the theme for this year is tearing down walls of indifferences and building bridges of excellence. So, yeah, and with that, I just want to run through what Friday day looked like. We have our keynote speaker is Dr. H. Gene Wright II, clinical and forensic psychologist. His theme would be talking about traumatization of black males in our city. And then on Friday, we have the state legislative panel discussion with State Senator Anthony Williams, Senator Art Haywood, and Senator Sharif Street. And also included on that panel is Representative W. Curtis Thomas as well. On Saturdays, on this Saturday, we have Dr. W. Wilson Good Sr.
Yes, our former mayor.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Powerful, innovative speaker. He's definitely going to bring the call to action, which he's going to discuss mentorship, what can churches do for returning citizens, employment, recruiting, and preparation. We will also have a panel discussion that reflects the effects of parolees who are not prepared to return to our society. And folks can definitely register online at www.m, which is Mount Airy, Kojic.com. That's www.mtairy, Kojic, Kogic.com. Or contact the church at 215-276-2960.
So for our listeners, listen, this Friday, October the 27th, at 6 p.m., that is the first day of this conference with Dr. H. Gene Wright II, a expert panel just talking about what only government can do, which is expunging records, and also the discussion of gun control. And then on Saturday at 8 a.m., 8 in the morning, the next day, you can hear from Dr. W. Wilson Good Sr., our former mayor and a person who's dedicated himself to this cause, as well as a panel discussion about the negative effect of parolees who are not prepared to return to society. And as Rodney Little said, you can register online. It's free, but you should register, so people know you're coming, they can prepare at www.mtairycogic.com, mountairycogic.com. And this will take place at the Mount Airy Church of God in Christ at 6401 Ogontz Avenue, 6401 Ogontz Avenue in Philadelphia. So this is interesting because basically what you're talking about when you talk about the Kingdom Men's Conference is really a call to action of our churches, of the faithful, to really live the example of Christ in this case, and that is to go out and open their doors to helping prevent crime by providing after-school services, literacy, engaging with young people, and then also calling upon lawyers to make themselves available 2 hours a month to provide legal guidance and information to people who oftentimes are frustrated by a very difficult legal system and circumstances that they find themselves in.
Yes, and Councilman, because our city is riddled with moral decay. I think that a lot of people in our society and in communities are disgruntled, so to speak. We go to church, we say we are Christians and we believe in the Almighty, but yet and still we have our school system that is dilapidated. Children are not being properly educated because they don't have the resources. So, Citizens Networking for Progress decided to, join in with Mount Airy Church of God in Christ to combat these type of issues that we look at every day. We got the returning citizens, people being lots of incarcerated inmates that are coming home, can't get jobs, and we talk about second chances. They can't get a second chance because nobody wants to hire them. We have all types of issues in our city that we want to tackle.
Right.
So this is what the call to action is all about. I think that it's something that we can't continue to point the finger and say that the city of Philadelphia, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, as men. And this is a conference for all men only.
Okay.
So it's almost about what you'll do for Christ that will last. We saying we saints and we love the Lord, so let's be about the business of what the Lord allows us to do, and that's to make sure that we protect our children, we protect our families, and we'll be about the business of making sure that our children are safe.
All right, fantastic. Well, it's a free event. It's expected to have a lot of people coming out. Yes.
So please, again, register online at www.mountairycogic.com. It's www.mountairycogic.com.
All right, fantastic. Well, Rodney Little, thank you for joining me. Rodney and I are friends. We've known each other a long time, and I appreciate all the work that you do in the community, helping folks and everything else. Well, listen, everybody, if you want to, listen to this show or let people know about it so they can hear about it, tell them to go to www.wwdbam.com, and they can also see a video and take a look at Rodney Little and Juman Kim over here. He said there's a younger generation, older generation. You'll know whether he was younger and older if you see his face. So listen, tune in next week, Tuesday, 2 to 3 for In the Know with David O.